Hello, my friends. Welcome to Lindy's Magpie Reads. If you're new here, I'm Lindy and I read a lot. So this is a place where I talk about books. And today I've got a lot to say about the Yukon as well, because I just came back from 10 days with my sister who has a farm there. Oh, so gorgeous. I love the Yukon. Yeah, it's a lovely, lovely place. I'll pop in some photos. You can get an idea about what the farm is like. I went there specifically to attend a workshop on making a coiled basket. These are the recycled materials we used. I'll show you. We had electrical cord, round cord, and we had strips of fabric, and this is what we made, a basket. So I think I can put in a little bit of video showing how it's done. You take fabric, wrap it around the cord, and then with a needle and thread, use a blanket stitch to attach one layer of cord to the next. So you're not trying to put the needle through the electrical cord, you're attaching cloth to cloth. And it's a very meditative, pleasant kind of activity. I am definitely going to make more of these baskets. I have a friend here in Victoria who's asked me to show her house. I'm going to do that. So while I was there for the basket making, that's why I timed my visit that way. My sister and her husband have a meat shop, and in January for a few weeks it's closed. So she wasn't going into work. All she had was regular farm things to look after. And so we spent a lot of time knitting. Simone is my sister. She is a whiz with all kinds of fiber arts. While I was there, she knitted herself a vest made out of a fleece that she bought when we were together at Fibre Week at Olds, Alberta. That was in June of 2019. She bought an entire brown sheep fleece and she spun it. And yes, she's knitted it up into a vest. I was working on a shawl. It's not finished yet. I can show you how far I am now. I'll just pop in a picture. I don't have it handy. This is made with alpaca that I dyed with an assortment of kitchen scraps. And when you dye yarn, it's got to be in skeins so it doesn't, and tied in a certain way so it doesn't get tangled in the pot of dye. And so all parts of the yarn are exposed to dye. So the skein needs to get put into a ball in order to knit from it. And Simone has all the tools. So instead of doing everything by hand, propping up the skeins on a chair, which is what I do here, she's got the nitty-knotty that you use to get the yarn off of the spinning wheel. She's got the swift that holds the skein while you use a ball winder to wind it up. So that just makes the knitting go so much quicker. Another thing that happened while I was there is the annual general meeting of the Northern Fibers Guild. And I've been a member for about 10 years, but I'm rarely there for a meeting. Although I was there, I've been there a few times for a meeting. That's on the second Tuesday of the month in Whitehorse. But the annual general meeting, I was there once before, and they have a big draw to get members to come. They have an auction. So members who have fiber from their stash that they're not using, donate it. And there were a couple of additional special donations this year. One from a member who had been working for years with qiviut. And if you don't know qiviut, this is the hair from muskox. It is comparable to cashmere in how soft and warm it is. Anyway, it's expensive stuff because it's rare. The fiber gets collected from bushes by Inuit people and other indigenous people in the far north where the muskox live, because they shed their hair in the spring. But because it's so cold, these muskoxen have, warm coats. And you can spin that into luxurious garments, very warm garments that are really light. So, for example, I have this toque. I inherited it from my mom, and if only you could feel how soft it is. But it weighs 38 grams, so that's only a little over an ounce. And if you wanted to buy this toque today, you would probably pay $250 to $300. Yeah. Here is a cowl that I knitted from qiviut. Anyway, so at the auction, they had all these little bags with small balls of qiviut in them. 50 grams, $5 each. Everybody bought some. So I'm just pulling one out here. So this is by Folk Knits, and it is 25 grams. And back in 2001, the price tag is on here, it was $50. So 25 grams. So this is about an ounce. If you wanted to buy this today, you would pay at least $150. $5. Bargains. So I did buy some other qiviut as well. I've got some on a cone. This is a really fine lace weight. I think I will, I don't know what I'm going to be making out of this, but I am going to have fun. I also got this big bag full of colors. Let's show you better. There's some of the colors in here. And these are 60% qiviut, 40% wool. And I also got some skeins of hand-spun single sheep breed fleeces. So this one is Suffolk. I've got, this is a Suffolk Welsh cross. This one's a Targhee Columbia. What else? Rambouillet. And this one was combed and spun unwashed. So if you are a knitter, you know that different breeds of sheep, the wool can be really different. And I wanted the opportunity to just get a feel for what these different wools are like to work with. And yeah, so I'll know for the future. So that's my big auction excitement. I had to have an extra bag coming home. Oh, my sister also gave me an entire fleece. I told her I was interested in looking for a fleece here on Vancouver Island, or just skirting, the dirty edges, the edges that aren't so good for spinning, to use as mulch in my garden. And she said, I've got one you can have. So I stuffed it in my bag, and yeah. Simon also made soap while I was there, so maybe I'll put a little bit about soap making at the very end of this video. If you're interested, stick around for that. Oh yeah, the other thing that we did, we went to the hot spring 3 times during the 10 days that I was there. That is such a treat. It's only about 10 kilometers from my sister's farm. It's called the Eclipse Nordic Spa. If you go to Whitehorse, do not miss this. It is such a beautiful place. And we were there in the daytime. Another time we were there after dark. It's still a pretty short day length in January because they're so far north. But you could, just look up there and see stars and feel your hair getting a bit frozen. They actually have frozen hair competitions. Yeah, that's not something I plan to do. I would just duck my head back under the warm water to warm up. And steam rooms, saunas, all that lovely stuff for relaxation in between the knitting. So I didn't get much reading done during that time because my sister and I were too busy talking, but I've made up for it since I came home, and I did read a little bit. So I think I've got 8. Yeah, I've got 8 books to tell you about, and I think I'm going to go through them pretty quickly. There are 4 audiobooks, so I'll start with those. Get the Picture, a mind-bending journey among the inspired artists and obsessive art fiends who taught me how to see. It's by Bianca Bosker, and it's read by the author. She's an American freelance journalist. She also wrote Cork Dork, about getting into the wine tasting world. So this one is her asking the question. She really wanted to know, what is it that makes art good? And in particular, the, I guess, somewhat rarefied world of contemporary art, where prices can be sky high. And so she interned at a couple of New York City galleries. She worked for free as an assistant to an artist. She hung out with art collectors, and she worked as a museum guard at the Guggenheim. So she had lots of different perspectives, and I love art and talking about art and hearing people talk about art. So yeah, I thought this book was just great, quite fascinating. As a good example of people being strange, there's this gallerist that she talks about, one of the places where she was working as an intern, where Jack wanted to redesign his website so that it was white text on a white background. And you're probably wondering the same thing as I was and she was. Why? It's because Jack didn't want to make it easy for people. They have to, fool around on the screen and click different places to try and find things. Okay. There's one thing in particular that I could identify with so much. So when Bianca was assisting the painter, she said she looked at color so much that it changed the way that she looked at the world. She would just be out in the park or walking down the street and think, look at the color of the sky, or look at the color of those new leaves. And this is what happened to me when I took up painting with chalk pastels. I started noticing nuances of color, like in clouds in the sky, like what is that blue, purple, gray, pinkish? Is it a warm gray? Is it a cool gray? You know, all those little distinctions in color, I just started noticing it more. And I don't know, it just makes the world seem more vibrant. Yeah, Bianca writes, art is a way for us to fight our instincts, to truncate and elide, and in so doing, to notice more, appreciate more, empathize more, which is all to say, experience more. Yeah. And she also talks about how the art that moves us, the art that makes us sort of open ourselves up, does shift and change as we get older, as we experience more of life. So that's an interesting thing too. She went to countless art openings, like several a night, for night after night. When she was working as an intern at art galleries, it was like a job, go to art openings. And at many of these places, beauty was like a bad word. You weren't supposed to say anything about being beautiful. She definitely resisted that. And I say good for her, because, you know, when you feel like the world is falling apart, you can turn to something that makes you feel good. Beauty is something that makes me feel good. So fortunately, there's beauty everywhere. The next audiobook I listened to is also nonfiction. It's called Every Living Thing, and it's by Jason Roberts, who is an American journalist. So this is about scientific rivalry and an obsession to identify and describe every living thing in the world. So there are two men. Both of them were born in 1707, Carl Linnaeus and Georges-Louis Le Buffon. Linnaeus was Swedish, Buffon was French, and they each had quite a different worldview. So with Linnaeus, it was a deeply Christian view of things being created by God and always staying the same. Whereas Buffon's, his viewpoint was also Christian, although he saw life as being more complex. Too complex to have hard and fast categories. Linnaeus laid the groundwork for racism. As far as he was concerned, human beings were separate races, and he identified them, whereas Buffon argued strongly against that. He said human beings are one species, and that was a big bone of contention between them. Buffon actually faced formal charges as well for suggesting that the earth was older than the Bible indicated. And I am somebody who loves to know the names of things, especially plants. And from a young age, I've been in awe of Carl Linnaeus and his scientific binomial system. When I was in Uppsala in 2002, I went to the Linnaeus farm, and I was almost overcome to see his handwriting, to be in the place where this great man had been. Well, after listening to this audiobook, I realized this man was very strange. He's no longer on my up on a pedestal kind of person, that's for sure. Yeah, I'm fine with that. I learned that today's scientific classification system is actually only a very small part still connected to the work of Linnaeus. And it's other men who are talked about in this book who have had a lot more of an influence. And in contemporary times, the way that we look at life has more to do with clades. So instead of, we started out with the animal kingdom and a plant kingdom, and then Ernst Haeckel, who suggested that there should be a separate kingdom for fungi and single-celled organisms. Anyway, there's been much that happened, through the later 18th century and into the 19th century and then into the 20th century. So now, clades. So cladism is looking at groups of organisms by how closely related they are in our common ancestry. So, for example, the lotus is less related to the water lily than it is to the sycamore tree. And papayas are very closely related to cabbages / kale / broccoli. Here's a quote. So many evolutionary paths have adapted to free-swimming undersea life that Pisces, category Pisces, fish, has now been retired entirely. What we informally group as fish represent more than a dozen monophyletic lines of descent, so genetically diverse that some biologists have enjoyed pointing out that fish do not really exist. If one drew a cladistic circle broad enough to encompass all fish, the circle would include humans as well. So there's a book that I read a few years ago called Why Fish Don't Exist by Lulu Miller, and that comes up in that book as well. I recommend Why Fish Don't Exist, by the way, and I recommend Every Living Thing. It's a long audiobook, 14 hours. The narration by David de Vries is really good. Enjoyed that. So let's get into some fiction now. If you're feeling like you need something cozy, something that will help you escape what's going on in the news, what's going on in the world, here's a good suggestion. Catfish Rolling. It's by Clara Kumagai. The author was born in Canada to a Japanese father and an Irish mother. She moved with her family to Ireland, and I think she mostly grew up there. This book won the Book of the Year at the Children's Books Ireland Award in 2024. I actually picked it up because my YA book club is going to be discussing this. So the central character, Sora, is a teenager who has grown up in Vancouver, but she and her family have gone back to Japan every year. And while she's there, there's a massive earthquake. It's such a big event that time gets disrupted. And then there are these zones where it's dangerous to go because time is moving more slowly or time is moving more quickly. And her father is a scientist studying this. It is a coming of age story about figuring out where you belong, someone who is half Japanese, half Canadian, figuring out what you want to be when you get older. It's about dealing with the loss of a parent. It's about dealing with a parent who is ill, figuring out romance stuff. There's a queer love story in here. So lots to enjoy, and yeah, I'm really happy that I read it. So the title comes from Japanese mythology and the story that there is a giant catfish under Japan, and when it moves, the earth moves with it. And there are supernatural beings from Japanese mythology that are showing up in these time zone affected areas. Creatures like the tengu, the tanaki, various yokai. So if you're interested in Japanese mythology, you'll get some of that in this book as well. And the next audiobook that I picked up is also a cozy speculative fiction. It's called I'm Afraid You've Got Dragons, and it's by Peter S Beagle, the same American writer who wrote The Last Unicorn. That's a fantasy classic that came out back in 1968. So Beagle is, I think, 85 years old now. Was very pleased to see another book from him. But the prologue ties in so well with the book I was just telling you about, Catfish Rolling. So this is a line from the prologue in I'm Afraid You've Got Dragons. The world has turned noisily in its sleep, like some babe disturbed in the cradle, fussing and crying until it forgets the dreams that troubled it. Yeah. This is a whimsical fantasy adventure set in a sort of medieval type world with knights, kings, queens, princes and princesses, and dragons of every size. Dragons are considered vermin. The small ones infest castles and buildings. And our central character is a dragon exterminator. Robert is not happy with this job because he loves dragons so much. There are dragons, though, that are huge and dangerous, fire-breathing, you've got the whole gamut in I'm Afraid You've Got Dragons. Yeah, this is fun. I enjoyed myself with this book. And I've got one more cozy story for you. This one is cozy science fiction mystery. It's The Imposition of Unnecessary Obstacles by Malka Older. So this is the second in a series about a woman named Mossa, who's an investigator of missing persons, and her girlfriend Pleiti, who is a classicist, a scholar studying classic Earth literature, and she's interested in the 20th and 21st century. The books are set on Jupiter, on constructed rings around the planet Jupiter after Earth has become uninhabitable, and scholars are researching ecology with the end goal being to recreate life on Earth once humanity is able to return there. This is definitely a queer series. There are 3 genders. Ta is used for the third gender. There's a lot about food. food from all over the planet Earth. That's just part of Earth culture, is represented, I guess, in food, like scones sprinkled with cocoa, cinnamon, and garam masala. There's pupusa. There's a kind of Georgian candy called churchkala. I had to look that up on the internet. Lentil stew, shakshuka, shredded yucca with garlic. They talk about bowls of laksa, which made me want to make this laksa. It's, if you don't know it, it's coconut milk-based, savory kind of soup with noodles in it and vegetables. Yeah, maybe I'll make some later today. And the vocabulary also incorporates words from other languages. So just a few that I took note of. Good courage, from bon courage, jest, mueka, chisme, ma'alesh, shibui, grok. So that one's from Robert Heinlein's Stranger in a Strange Land. There's the word academiophiliac. I don't know if that's used elsewhere in English or not. It's easy to figure out what it means. And another cool thing is opera is the big entertainment that these two women enjoy. At one point, Pleiti is humming an aria from Murderbot. So if you know Martha Wells' series Murderbot, you know it's like finding an Easter egg within this novel. She also talks about the opera for Boys Over Flowers, which is a manga series you might know, and one of Malka Older's earlier novels, which I've also read, called Infomocracy. I don't even know if I'm saying that right, but whatever, it's a made-up word. Yeah, that was fun. Next, I have a graphic novel adaptation of a classic play, R.U.R, the Karel Čapek Classic, and it was adapted into this comics format by Kateřina Čupová, translated to English by Julie Nováková. I'll show you what the art looks like inside. It's full color. The original play was first staged in Prague in 1921, and then it was translated into about 30 different languages, and it was on Broadway in 1922. Angelia from the channel Read and Reread is doing a play reading project this year, and I think this is one of the well, not this graphic novel format, but the play itself was one of the picks for January. I will include information about her project or a link to her video down below if you want to find more information. So I haven't read the play, but I really did find this story quite gripping. There's an island with a manufacturing plant where thousands of robots are made to replace the work that humans do. And what if robots decide to replace humans? It's very thought-provoking, and yeah, I'm really glad I picked this up, and I'm probably going to have a look at the play at some point as well. Okay, I've got 2 more books to tell you about. Prairie, Dresses, Art, Other is by Danielle Dutton. And this one is hard to categorize. It is like, it's a combination. The Prairie section are the short stories. The Dresses section is like a collage of really brief excerpts from other works of fiction, 66 pieces of writing about dresses. And then the final two sections are essays. I did this as a buddy read with one of my subscribers, Louise, and there was lots to talk about. Look at all those flagged bits. I had it on my TBR back from when this book was first announced, because I read Danielle Dutton's Margaret the First, a novel, and loved it. So when I saw she had something new coming out, I, took note. And then in 2023, this was on the best books of 2023 by Sarah of Eyes on Indie. I will link her video down below. And I bought myself a copy. And then at the end of I hadn't read it yet, at the end of 2024, Sophie of Biblio Sophie had this on her list of best books of 2024. And I thought, okay, I must get to it. So fortunately, Louise also had a copy. And so we read it. Now, if it wouldn't have been for Louise and the Buddy Reading Project, I don't know if I would have got on to the best parts for me, because the first section, Prairie, the stories, there's a strange element in each story. There's a weirdness to it that I kept thinking, what's going on here? What's going on? I feel like I'm not getting it. And I might have just given up on it. But because of my buddy reader and having somebody to sound off, a sounding board, I should say, I carried on. And when I got to the dresses section, I loved it. There's something about, I don't know, it's like a found poem, I guess, taking bits of writing from other writers and then collaging them together, just placing them on the page to read them, get something different out of them, I guess. I did recognize a number of the bits from books that I had read. Like, for example, there's a line about the petticoats having a thick layer of mud on the bottom that I recognized from Pride and Prejudice. There was a Edith Wharton bit that I recognized. The Scarlet Letter. Anna Karenina. There was a bit in there that I thought, oh, okay, I know this is Kitty. I know who this is about. And then the second half of the book, stuff about art, stuff about writing. Oh, I just loved it so much. Because of the first part, this didn't quite make a 5-star read for me. But 4.5. And I have to say that because I kept going back to those first stories or bits from the first stories and rereading them, whether because something later on in the book seemed to reference it or something that Louise said that we were buddy reading, I felt like I got more out of those first stories as well by rereading. I'm going to hold on to this and at some point in the future read it again. But the best thing about Danielle Dutton's writing is her sentences. I told Louise at one point, this sentence makes me swoon. Now, I can't even remember which sentence it was, but there are plenty of sentences in here that are just so good. And Louise remembered that when Shaun Bree's books had Suzanne Scanlon as a mystery guest, she talked about Danielle Dutton and how much she loved her sentences. So it's not just me, folks. Let's see if I can find one for you. When he parked the car this morning, she saw a patch of wild carrot growing by the edge of the road, flat white face of a flower made up of many smaller flowers, like a galaxy in a swirl. Here's a bit of what she says about writing. Ostensibly, I write novels and stories, yet I often find myself more interested in spaces and things than in plots. The world is astonishing. I want to ask, how might fiction be conceived of as a space within which we attend to the world? Wow. Just talking about it makes me love it even more. So, yes, I'm so glad that I finally read this. Now, it just happened that I also brought this book with me to the Yukon, A Horse at Night on Writing by Amina Kane. And I didn't know it at the time because I hadn't started reading this one yet. But Danielle Dutton is the editor and designer of this book, which, I got to show you the cover. It's a great painting, which is also referred to in the essays in here. And Amina Kane, in this book, writes about something that Marguerite Duras said about anguish and soup. And then Danielle Dutton in here writes about anguish and soup based on something that Amina Kane said in here. So the correspondences between these two books, wow. I marked with green flags in here every time Amina Kane referenced an author who I had read. She references many, many different authors in here. So this is a book for people who love literary fiction and love thinking about how writing is crafted. Lots of intriguing thoughts, lots of kind of behind the scenes scenarios or scenes, behind the scenes scenes. I'm not a writer and obviously not a very good talker either. This is definitely my favorite of all the books that I've told you about today. And let me assure you, all of the books that I've told you about, I have enjoyed very much. This one is just a whole other level. This one will make I think my best books of 2025. And it's a library copy. I think I need to own one so that I can just pick it up and read passages at random. Yeah, love it. It's Speaking of reading passages at random, she says, I want to leave a chain of images that remain in the reader's mind. I want to write what heightened experience feels like. She goes on to talk about her novel Indelicacy, which I loved, and what she was trying to do in that novel. Here's another part where she talks about a visual impression. How can a detail be urgent and at the same time concealed? In fiction, what does that look like? And how do we bring the reader back to it? Perhaps it never leaves us, is part of the visual impression of what we've read, the narrative unfolding in pictures, running parallel to its unfolding through events. An impression can be just as important as meaning. And she goes on to talk about painting and drawing and photography. It's a lot about ekphrasis in here and also in Daniel Dutton's book. So if you're interested in ekphrasis, in writing that describes art, there's so much to enjoy. Well, that's all I've got for you today. So thank you for sticking with me this far, if you have. I always love to hear from you, so please say hello in the comments down below. Let me know if you've read any of these books. Let me know if anything that I've said resonates with you. I want to hear about good stuff that you are reading, so tell me about that. And stick around if you want to see a little bit of soap making activity. And until the next time, happy reading, everybody. Bye for now. Simon is outdoors mixing the lye into the liquid for the soap. Lye is sodium hydroxide. It is caustic. And there's a chemical reaction happening. The liquid gets very hot, so it's going to cool off outside. The melted fat and the lye are the same temperature, so they get combined. And eventually it saponifies.
You keep stirring.
So you can see here it solidifies, and it's in a mold. After a day or two, Simon cuts it into bars, and now it needs to cure for 30 days. So Simon sent me home with some. Here it is.